Stanley Cavell. Stanley Louis Cavell, /KVL/ September 1, 1926, June 19, 2018, was an American philosopher. He was the Walter M. Cabot Professor of Aesthetics and the General Theory of Value at Harvard University. He worked in the fields of ethics, aesthetics, and ordinary language philosophy. As an interpreter, he produced influential works on Wittgenstein, Austin, Emerson, Thoreau, and Heidegger. His work is characterized by its conversational tone and frequent literary references. Life. Cavell was born to a Jewish family in Atlanta, Georgia. His mother, a locally renowned pianist, trained him in music from his earliest days. During the Depression, Cavell's parents moved several times between Atlanta and Sacramento, California. As an adolescent, Cavell played lead alto saxophone as the youngest member of a black jazz band in Sacramento. He entered the University of California, Berkeley, where, along with his lifelong friend Bob Thompson, musician, he majored in music, studying with, among others, Roger Sessions and Ernest Bloch. After graduation, he studied composition at the Juilliard School of Music in New York City, only to discover that music was not his calling. He entered graduate school at UCLA, studying philosophy, and then transferred to Harvard University. As a student there he came under the influence of J.L. Austin, whose teaching and methods knocked him off course. In 1954 he was awarded a junior fellowship at the Harvard Society of Fellows. Before completing his Ph.D., he became an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, in 1956. Cavell's daughter by his first wife, Marcia Cavell, Rachel Lee Cavell, was born in 1957. From 1962 to 1963 Cavell was a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, where he befriended the British philosopher Bernard Williams. Cavell's marriage to Marcia ended in divorce in 1961. In 1963 he returned to the Harvard Philosophy Department, where he became the Walter M. Cabot Professor of Aesthetics and the General Theory of Value. In the summer of 1964, Cavell joined a group of graduate students, who taught at Tougaloo College, a historically black college in Mississippi, as part of what became known as the Freedom Summer. He and Kathleen Cohen Cavell were married in 1967. In April 1969, during the student protests, chiefly arising from the Vietnam War, Cavell, helped by his colleague John Rawls, worked with a group of African American students to draft language for a vote by the faculty that established the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard. In 1976, Cavell's first son Benjamin was born. In 1979, along with the documentary filmmaker Robert Gardner, Cavell helped found the Harvard Film Archive, to preserve and present the history of film. Cavell received a MacArthur Fellowship in 1992. From 1996 to 1997 Cavell was president of the American Philosophical Association, Eastern Division. In 1984, his second son David was born. He remained on the Harvard faculty until his retirement in 1997. After retiring, he taught courses at Yale University and the University of Chicago. He also held the Spinoza Chair of Philosophy at the University of Amsterdam in 1998. Cavell died in Boston, Massachusetts of heart failure on June 19, 2018 at the age of 91. He was buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Philosophy. Although trained in the Anglo-American analytic tradition, Cavell frequently interacted with the continental tradition. He includes film and literary study and philosophical inquiry. Cavell writes extensively on Ludwig Wittgenstein, J.L. Austin, and Martin Heidegger, as well as on the American transcendentalists Henry Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. He interprets Wittgenstein in a fashion known as the New Wittgenstein. Cavell's writing incorporates autobiographical elements concerning how his movement between and within the ideas of these thinkers influenced and influences his own thinking that impacted spheres in the arts and humanities beyond the technical study of philosophy. Cavell established his distinct philosophical identity with Must We Mean What We Say? 1969, which addresses topics such as language use, metaphor, skepticism, tragedy, and literary interpretation, from the point of view of ordinary language philosophy, of which he is a practitioner and ardent defender. One of the essays discusses Søren Kierkegaard's work on revelation and authority, the book on Adler, in an effort to help reintroduce the book to modern philosophical readers. In The World Viewed, 1971, Cavell looks at photography and film. He also covers modernism in art and the nature of media, where he mentions the influence of art critic Michael Fried's writing on his work. Cavell is perhaps best known for his book, The Claim of Reason, Wittgenstein, Skepticism, Morality, and Tragedy, 1979, which forms the centerpiece of his work, and which has its origins in his doctoral dissertation. In Pursuits of Happiness, 1981, Cavell describes his experience of 7 prominent Hollywood comedies: The Lady Eve, It Happened One Night, Bringing Up Baby, The Philadelphia Story, His Girl Friday, Adam's Rib, and The Awful Truth. Cavell argues that these films, from the years 1934 to 1949, form part of what he calls the genre of the comedy of remarriage, and he finds in them great philosophical, moral, and indeed political significance. Specifically, Cavell argues that these Hollywood comedies show that the achievement of happiness requires not the satisfaction of our needs but the examination and transformation of those needs. According to Cavell, the emphasis that these movies place on remarriage draws attention to the fact that, within a relationship, happiness requires growing up together with one's partner. In Cities of Words, 2004, Cavell traces the history of moral perfectionism, a mode of moral thinking spanning the history of Western philosophy and literature. Having used Emerson to outline the concept, this book suggests ways we might want to understand philosophy, literature, and film as preoccupied with features of perfectionism. In Philosophy the Day After Tomorrow, 2005, a collection of essays, Cavell makes the case that J.L. Austin's concept of performative utterance requires the supplementary concept of passionate utterance. A performative utterance is an offer of participation in the order of law. And perhaps we can say, a passionate utterance is an invitation to improvisation in the disorders of desire. The book also contains extended discussions of Friedrich Nietzsche, Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Fred Astaire, as well as familiar Cavellian subjects such as Shakespeare, Emerson, Thoreau, Wittgenstein, and Heidegger. Cavell's final book, Little Did I Know, Excerpts from Memory, 2010, is an autobiography written in the form of a diary. In a series of consecutive, dated entries, Cavell inquires about the origins of his philosophy by telling the story of his life. A scholarly journal, The Conversations, the Journal of Cavellian Studies, engages with his philosophical work. It is edited by Sergio Diaz-Branco and Amir Khan and published by the University of Ottawa. Honorary degrees. Selected honors. Selected special lectureships. Bibliography. Special lectureships.